This morning. Thanks, Alex. Um, yeah, I'm super excited to welcome one of our new mentors for our classes, Rebekah, this morning. She's going to be talking about the role of sports, or the role of coding in sports, and I'll let her introduce her job and talk a little bit more about her role. But thank you, Rebekah, for joining us this morning. We're excited to have you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for having me. As Reed said, my name is Rebekah. I am a software engineer in the baseball analytics department at the Philadelphia Phillies, which is quite frankly not where I imagined myself to be at this point in my life, but I'm pretty grateful to be here. So Reed, if you don't mind, I'm going to share a PowerPoint because otherwise I will ramble. Can you?
Sure, I think I need to make you co-host.
Yeah.
Okay. There we go.
Awesome, thank you. Make sure I have the right screen. Actually. You'd think after years of digital work, I would be better at this, but I'm not. Nope. All right, can you see it? Awesome. I spent like 2 years exclusively teaching on Zoom and still have to check in. So what I wanted to talk about today, I wanted to give you an overview of kind of my journey into software engineering and baseball. I would say I have a pretty non-traditional entry into software engineering, but for baseball too, I wouldn't say that there's one path into baseball. So I think actually I'm more on the typical side in baseball because there isn't really anything typical. And then I'll go through a little bit about what my job is like, what I do, and kind of give you some generalities too from what I understand of like the field in general. And then I'll open it up for questions. In the process though, feel free to stop me at any time, ask questions. I can't see the chat, but if anyone throws a question in the chat, Reed, will you just interrupt me and tell me what it is?
Sure.
Thank you. So starting out a little bit about my journey, before I talk about how I get into coding, I think I'll talk first a little bit about how I got into my first career. Programming is my second career, but my third attempt at a career. So it's been a bit of a journey. When I went to college in 2009, I thought I wanted to be a doctor. My rationale for that was I like science and I like helping people, which I don't think is a bad starting point, but I hadn't had the opportunity to shadow a doctor. I mean, like I had been in a doctor's office, but I hadn't really talked to doctors about what their job was like and what it really entailed. About 2 years into my undergrad, I realized this was not a good fit for me for a variety of reasons. And in trying to figure out what I wanted to do instead, I decided to study abroad in Spain. I was given that opportunity through my university. And that program was you were working as an English teaching assistantship. So they actually mostly funded the program for you. I wouldn't have been able to fully fund a study abroad on my own. And my rationale was I speak Spanish, I speak English, surely I can teach English. That's a terrible approach and mindset, FYI. That does not make you a good teacher. I did my best, absolutely, but it was a poorly informed best. And I think, quite frankly, like I benefited from it a lot more than they did. I would definitely like rethink those decisions now if I knew what I knew now. Coming back from that though, I realized a lot of where like my interests was like I did love science, but I really loved education. I really loved teaching, especially adults. I had done a lot of tutoring and peer mentoring and things within the science realm, but also really liked traveling and working with people from other cultures and learning languages. So I decided to switch gears. I decided that teaching English as an additional language was going to be like what I wanted to pursue. I was really fortunate. I had a couple mentors at my university who encouraged me to finish my STEM degree, pick up a certificate in TEFL, teaching English as a foreign language, and then pursue a grad degree in this because I knew I wanted to work with adults. And if you ever want to be able to work teaching English as an additional language in the US, you have to have a master's degree, more or less. I continued on this path, but with kind of this mindset of like, I wanted to get real life experience at the same time. So I had a better understanding of what I wanted to do. And so I would be more qualified for a job. So I took 3 years to do a 2-year master's program because I spent a year teaching English in Columbia at a university. Also volunteer taught at the university I was at, all of those sorts of things. When I graduated in 2016, it was a really rough year. In some ways, it was really good. I got married. That was a great thing. But in that, decided to stay in the US because of the type of work that my partner does. He would not be able to easily find a job in his area abroad. And in doing that, it's very, very, very difficult to find a full-time role teaching English as an additional language in the US, especially when you're limited to a specific region because of family choices. Not that there's anything wrong with limiting yourself to a region, but it doesn't work when there are no jobs. And so that first year after graduating, I actually had to work 4 part-time jobs in order to make ends meet. I was an adjunct instructor, but then also was working a variety of other odd jobs in order to pay the bills. So about a year of doing that, I was pretty close to like completely giving up and just doing something else, but I had no idea what that would be. And then I was offered a full-time role. It was for the field. It was a very good job. So it was full-time. It included benefits. It was a lot of hours, but it was nowhere near like the contact hours you would have in education in the public school system. It was working with adults, which is what I wanted to do, all of that. Within a year of being there, I realized that as much as I loved teaching, I did not like the politics surrounding academia and teaching, and it was not going to be a career that was sustainable for me long-term. I was looking at coworkers that had 30, 35 years experience. They were making the same amount of money that I was making, which was well below what you would make in any other industry with that level of education. And they were like, I had a coworker that worked like 12-hour days, 6 days a week, every week, the entire school year. And she had 30 years experience. And this was just like the norm. This is what was expected. And I was like, I can't, like, I didn't go to medical school because I didn't want a job that was this consuming and stressful. And like, I went into a career that's almost the same, but just pays way less and has less job security because it was also a year-to-year contract. But I also knew I had experience from part-time work, but like I was brand new. And one of the big things is like, at least the research for teaching is like your first 2 years are the worst, like across the board all the time. Like teacher programs don't prepare you for how difficult it's going to be. And so I was like, well, I want to try to stick it out for a couple of years. First of all, because I have no idea what I want to do next. This is where I put all my eggs into one basket. And then also because like, I want to try it out. Like I want to really see if it's as rough as I think it is, and if I'm going to continue to struggle. And I really love the time that I was teaching. It is now 5 years later, and I am already in another career, so I did not make it 5 years. And that's for a variety of reasons. So I started kind of trying to figure out what it was I wanted to do next. And so in 2019, I took an Intro to Python course through my local community college. Did this for a couple of reasons. I really was interested in numbers and data and research, whether from the language learning perspective or even back when I did it in science, although I didn't like working in wet labs. I had never been exposed to programming before though. My dad actually works in IT, but he went the route of help desk and then into project management and then IT management. And so he never really was a programmer. And so in my mind, I was like, I don't like computer science because I don't like messing with printers and laptops and hardware. So that's not a thing for me. And I didn't really realize like what programming entailed until I started kind of getting introduced to it. One of the things I was interested in when I was teaching was what's called corpus linguistics. Corpus linguistics is, if you know what natural language processing is, so natural language processing is from a computer science perspective, it's using computers to produce, replicate, or analyze language. Corpus linguistics is from the linguistics perspective. So you're a linguist and you're going to use computers to augment your understanding and research of language. And so most linguists are not taught how to program. They use like software that someone else has written. But when you get to a certain level, like you want to be able to modify and adapt things. So I took the class, first of all, to help with the research that I was doing, but also because I was like, I like numbers, I like research, like maybe if I learned how to program, like I could enter into some sort of other field from this. And I really enjoyed it, but I also found it really difficult to take a class at the same time I was a full-time instructor and also like trying to be a involved human being in my marriage. It was not a great combination of things. And then, as you probably know, beginning of 2020, all of our lives changed drastically. What you have to understand is I worked specifically with international students, primarily from China. So we drastically switched to online instruction, but also we had no idea if our students would be able to come back into the country. And if you remember, I said I was on a year-to-year contract because the type of job I had, there was never a long-term guarantee of a job. And because you were on a year-to-year contract, there was no severance pay. It wasn't any, like they could just choose to not give you a contract and like you were out of a job. And so in the spring, when COVID first started, when we went to leave at the end of the semester, I asked leadership like, hey, so like, how are we looking for next fall? And they're like, oh yeah, you have a job. Don't worry about it. We can't give it to you in writing because we never can, but you definitely have a job. The day I was supposed to sign my new contract, I finally received confirmation in an email. And this was in the middle of this was near the end of the summer. Well, actually, you maybe don't have a job. So we're going to give you 1 month. We're going to pay you for 1 more month. We're going to make you continue to work and set everything up for us. And then at the end of the month, we'll decide whether or not you have a job. And they did that to me 2 months in a row. And then like didn't give me my actual contract for teaching the semester until the day before the semester started. And that was when I was like, okay, I can't do this anymore. Like, first of all, I may not have a job. And the way all of this works, like you don't get another teaching job 2 days before the semester starts when everything is shut down because of COVID. Like there's nothing left. And then also like, I can't continue to be treated this way. And so for that fall, I enrolled in a boot camp. The title was Data Analytics and Visualization, but it was a pretty technical heavy boot camp. So the boot camp covered Python, SQL, JavaScript, HTML, and CSS. It also covered Excel and Tableau, but that really didn't factor into my future learning or experience after that. I was given the job, so that was great. But at that point, like I was already done, like I was on my way out. So it was a 6-month boot camp. It was, I think, about 20 hours a week between the instruction and the homework. And then again, because I was very fortunate in the type of role that I had, I also had like the month of December off. And so I devoted a ton of time after having I was close to done with my boot camp at that point, building out extra personal projects. So I built one major project through my boot camp and then also built out a weather app website. And then I'm really into fashion. And so I analyzed like how frequently I wore different elements of my wardrobe and built out a website to display that analysis. In the process of doing this, I knew because of my background that like a data analyst role was pretty well suited to my background and my experiences. And I thought it's something that I would like. In the process, I learned I actually really liked the software engineering side of things more than I liked the analytics. Like, yeah, analytics is interesting. I enjoy, doing an analysis and presenting my findings and influencing the decisions that people make. But I'm much happier like building buttons and interactive websites and like displaying information for people and allowing them to interact with it through a website. And I really liked writing code. And I was like, great, like this would have been nice to know a few years ago before I started all of this. So I worked a lot on building out projects. I graduated from my boot camp in February, took about a month to prepare my materials. get my portfolio in order, all of that. And then I started pretty aggressively applying for jobs. My semester was going to end in May. I really didn't want to leave students in the middle of the semester. I didn't feel a lot of loyalty to my university, but I did feel loyalty to students. And I didn't want to leave them in that position. So the goal was to get a job before the fall semester started. So that kind of brings me to my job search. In the past, like I'm a recovering perfectionist. Like I feel like I'm terrified of failure, terrified of rejection. And like my last job search was soul crushing because I had spent a year like looking for a job and either getting no calls back or, you know, being told I wasn't the right fit or whatever it may be. And so I had read an article in the process of kind of starting all of this process about how one of the reasons that women are underrepresented in tech is because they apply for fewer jobs. And that generally, again, these are very broad generalizations, women only apply for roles that they are fully or overqualified for, while men apply willy-nilly. And men get those jobs, even if they're not fully qualified for them. And I think that there are a lot of like broader societal factors here. But for me personally, this was a huge wake-up call that I had been socially conditioned to do this. I only pursued the things I felt I was qualified for. And if I wanted to do something I wasn't qualified for, I waited until I had qualifications before I went after it. And I decided that I was not going to do that this time. And in the process, I was going to embrace the fact that I was going to be rejected multiple times, and that was going to be okay, and that was going to be part of the process. And I'm not saying like I fully transformed myself with no help. I was also in therapy and different things, but like, and it was hard even through the process, but like I had this mantra of like, if you're 60% qualified for the role and you're interested, apply for it. What is the worst that happens? They say no. Like, that's it. They say no. It's going to hurt your feelings, and then you can move on from that. And I was really fortunate that I had a really supportive family and my husband and all of that. And so I applied to a ton of roles. And I applied for some that I was fully or overqualified for, but I also applied for a lot that I was not. And I also decided that in the process, I was going to be my authentic self. I'm really into fashion. I did a whole bunch of like wardrobe research that may, you know, kind of if you talk in generalities, sometimes that's not like the best way to sell yourself in a very male dominated industry. But I decided that like in this process, yes, I needed a job. But at the same time, if people were going to turn me down just because of my interests or because of how I was perceived, that wasn't the best fit for me anyways. And I knew that I might have to kind of compromise on that if we reached a point where I had no job and I needed one, but at least starting out, like I wanted to start that. And I was also going to require respect. I had worked in a really toxic environment for many years where the expectation was regardless of your health or well-being, you will get the work done. And if you don't, we'll let you go and someone else will do the work instead. And I really didn't want to continue that. Tech can be very toxic. And I was very clear, like in my standards from the beginning of like, you know, if I'm looking at a team before I'm interviewing with them and there are no women on the team, like I'm going to ask, why are there no women on your team? And depending on the answer given, like, and how far along we are in my job search, like I may not want to stay. I may not want to accept a position like that. And again, I came from this, I had a full-time job. I was not desperate at the time. I felt desperate, but I wasn't. There was a lot of privilege in the decision-making that I was doing. I'm not saying that everyone has the freedom to be able to, you know, be a little antagonistic in interviews. That's not always the option for everyone, but I felt like it was really important for me with where I was at in my life at that time. So that brings me to my job. So I was really fortunate. I've read a lot of numbers. This is not always the case. I actually think these numbers for me are fairly favorable. And so like, do not get discouraged if this doesn't happen for you. But like I applied to over 70 jobs. I had a lot of automated rejections. I have some jobs that 2 years later, I still never heard back from, including one that required additional supplemental materials and then never followed up. And in the process, I interviewed for 4 positions. Of the 4 positions I interviewed for, none of them were the ones I thought I would have landed interviews in. All of those were what I would have considered reach jobs. I was applying for data analyst roles. I applied for a couple product management roles, although that wasn't really where I wanted to be. And then I applied for software engineering internships. I was offered 2 positions, one as an analyst, a full-time analyst, and then one as an intern in software engineering at the Phillies. I chose to go with the Phillies for a couple of reasons. I am not an athletic person. I actually have a chronic connective tissue disorder, which makes me like very bad at sports, and they're not very good for me. But I really liked watching baseball and the numbers in baseball. I was super nervous going into the interview because tech has a bad rep. Baseball has a worse rep for women. Women especially, like underrepresented individuals, period, but women especially. And I asked a lot of questions in the interviews, and it was pretty clear that the group I would be working with at the Phillies was going to be a really great group. And it was also going to be the type of work that I was really interested in. So I was going to be a software engineer, but I was going to be a software engineer in an analytics department. So I could take on my love for research and data visualization and data-driven decision-making, but do it as a software engineer. So I took an internship last May. We have weird titles. So my title was software engineer associate. And then I was offered full-time in August of last year. And I've been full-time ever since. Did not see myself going this route. Of all the jobs I applied for, this is probably the one I felt least qualified for. And the most likely, like, why would they ever call me back? But it's something I really wanted to do. I was like 50 to 60% qualified for it. And like, if I hadn't applied, obviously I never would have gotten it. And so I'm really glad I went that route. So this is like the first, if you are into baseball at all, like, yes, what I do is the modern version of Moneyball. Like, that's what my department does. If you've seen the movie or read the book, but it's really not what it used to be. So my team specifically is our department is called Research and Development. We're made up of 2 titles, analysts and SWEs, so software engineers. I would argue that most of our analysts are actually data scientists. We just don't know the right title to call them. So the purpose of our team is to help the team win more games. I don't look at ticket sales. I don't know how many jerseys we sell. I don't know what our revenue is as a team. I don't do anything related to that. Our team exists to make us better at baseball. So the analysts are more on the decision-making side. They write code, but their primary focus is to research and then come up with better tools for better decision-making. On the SWE side, we run all of the infrastructure and collect all of the data and build out like the more fleshed out like tools that people use in that process. Within the realm of baseball, we're the last team to start a research and development department. So we started our team in 2016. Obviously, some teams go all the way back to the 80s of having these types of teams. But at this point, we're one of the largest in the number of people that we hire. And one of the things that I think makes us a bit more unique in the realm of baseball is I think like we have one of the highest numbers of software engineers. There are only a couple of other teams that have built out their software engineering and team to the same extent that they've built out the analytics and data science side. There are 9 of us who are full-time software engineers, ranging from software engineer all the way up to principal. So we have a range of experiences and backgrounds. There's also a huge diversity in like where we come from and background. So we have people with undergrad and master's degrees in computer science. We have someone who is a nationally renowned barista and has a degree in film studies. I come from education. So we're pretty diverse in that way. I wouldn't say we're the best at diversity in other ways, but we're working on that. Our SWE roles, we all have the same type of title, And in theory, you can kind of like build your own area and you can move around, but most people tend to work in one of three areas. So our web application development, data engineering, and DevOps. So our web application, we have a website that's used internally. I'm sorry, you can't see it. It's specifically for us, it's proprietary, that we build out to help the team make better decisions. Data engineering primarily deals with external data. So we pay for a lot of data sources or things like getting our data from MLB. They're the ones who ingest all of that data. And then DevOps runs all of our infrastructure. So my role specifically, I am based in Durham, North Carolina. I primarily am remote, although I do have the opportunity to travel to both Philadelphia and Clearwater. Clearwater is where our spring training complex is and also our instructs. I go to Philadelphia during the season once every like 5 to 6 weeks. I would not be required to do that, but the job is a lot more fun when you're actually in person for some of the time. I would consider the role that I have to be mostly full stack app development. So I primarily work on our internal web application from database table design all the way to building out the front end that people actually interact with. Although we are a large team for baseball, most teams in baseball are pretty chaotic in how they organize this type of work. So we don't have product managers, we don't have UI UX designers, we don't have project managers, like we don't have any of those things. So I pretty much work on the development process from start to finish. We're going to build out a new like feature. My director is going to be the one to kind of do that overall backlog management of like, okay, we actually want to work on this. And here, let me connect you with the people who are the stakeholders for this. I'm then going to meet with the stakeholders. I'm going to gather the requirements. I'm going to do the project planning. If I need new database tables, I'm going to build them. I'm then going to write my API routes to serve up all my data. And then I'm going to build out my front end. Once I have something to actually display to a user, I'm going to go and demo this to users, get feedback, go through that process. Once we're at a point where they're happy with it, I'm going to wrap up and close out the project. And then, continue with maintenance of that moving forward. Because I work more on our app, I have interfacing with almost everyone else in baseball who touches the team in some way. So I work with our analysts. If, someone builds out a new set of metrics, I'm going to then work to understand those and get those into our web app so people can see them. I work with front office, so the people who make the decisions on who we're going to trade and when and how we're going to acquire players. I work with player development. Those are the people who help players become better as they move up from the minor leagues up into the major leagues. I work with player acquisition, which is scouting, to help them organize and submit all of that information and then, submit that to front office for decision making. And then I do also work with the coaching staff also. So, tools that they would use on a day-to-day basis for game prep or different things like that. I've worked on a lot of really cool projects in the last year. I can't give you like 100% of details, but like one of the things I've worked on is pitch taggers. So we get a lot of automated information about individual pitches, but there's some information that we currently can't buy or can't automatically derive. And we need humans to actually tag that information. And so I built out a feature where you can go in and find pitches by different criteria. You can watch those videos and then you can tag those pitches for different data points that we would like to know about them. So coaches use this in the process of reviewing games. And then I built out a lot of the visualization tools that then allow you to like see what this information tells you about individual pitchers and catchers. I've also worked on a lot of the tools that are used in the decision-making process for the amateur draft. That's what this screenshot is. This was my 3 seconds of TV fame this last year during the draft. And this is not a software engineering thing, but I was the person who got to click the button as we drafted players this past year. And then it doesn't sound quite as exciting, but it is pretty interesting. I worked a lot on our player bios. So we have a page for every player in baseball that we're remotely interested in across all of the areas. And so building out different elements of that page, because that's really a source for all of the pieces of information we have from all of these different places. And then also a place for users to submit their information, like scouting evaluations or things like that. Working in baseball, there are pros and cons, and kind of depending on your personal goals and desires, I would say some things that to me are pros may not be pros to you, and some of the things that to me are cons may not be cons to you. So some of the pros, it's baseball. Like, it's really fun data to work with if you like sports. You know, I'm not sitting there wading through thousands and thousands of like financial transactions or, you know, modem responses or something. And with that, like, you get a lot of free tickets and gear, get to go to a lot of games. As part of that too, there's a lot of behind the scenes access. So I get to be a part of the amateur draft. I get to be a part of spring training. I get to talk to coaching as they're, you know, helping them build tools to make better decisions. But really, like, all of that is only like stuff that's cool or fun if baseball is something you're passionate about. I think also in that, like, you work with a lot of really passionate people. Most people don't go into baseball unless they have at least some level of interest with it on the tech side. And you absolutely do not go into baseball on the baseball side unless you really, really care about it. And so just working with a group of people that really care to do better is just a really fun experience. And there's a ton of room for growth and creativity and innovation, especially in the department that I'm in. We're always working on something new. We're always trying new things. There's a lot of encouragement for you to move around, try different things, do different things. And I think that, like, at least for now in my job, is something that really helps me thrive. Some of the disadvantages to working in baseball, if you're not a baseball person, there's over 150 games in the season, and they're played 6 days a week. Because we also serve front office and minor league and all of that, baseball is almost 24/7, especially when you factor in like our international scouting and things like that. And first of all, there are certain times of the year where it's completely unavoidable that the job extends into weekends, it extends into evenings, things like that. But also it can be, you know, I said you work with a lot of really passionate people. It can be very easy to get wrapped up into the baseball grind and end up working yourself into the ground. So if you don't have really strong like personal boundaries, it can lead to a lot of burnout pretty quickly. My department specifically is very good about protecting our engineers, encouraging people to take time off, encouraging people to take breaks, spreading out the weekend work so that it's not always the same person losing their weekends. But I can't say the same for every team. I haven't worked on other teams. As part of that too, it's a really, really fast development cycle. It's like baseball people on the baseball side, like, work 24/7, and they don't always understand that like you can't or won't work 24/7 also. And you're working with people who don't necessarily understand tech. And so there'll be like, what do you mean you can't build that entire thing in the next 3 days before the season starts? Like, I woke up in the middle of the night with this idea, like, why can't we get it out right now? And so in the past, there's been a lot of push for getting things like built up quickly. And so we've acquired a lot of tech debt. We have a lot of messy code because of that. We're working as a team to change that, to build things more slowly, but also like more selectively and more effectively. But like, there's a lot of growth that needs to happen for that to occur. And the only reason we're moving forward in that direction is because we have buy-in from leadership. If you were interested in working in baseball, like, this is something you would want to ask the team that you're interviewing about. Because for a lot of teams, like, winning a game now is more important than whether or not your entire website is going to collapse in 3 months because you set it up incorrectly. Like, they'll deal with that when they get there. Also, analytics in baseball is not new. Software engineering is relatively new. Everybody at this point is trying to hire at least 1 or 2 data engineers. Not everybody actually knows what a data engineer is or what it is they're supposed to do. And a lot of teams like don't if they do decide to go the route of like what we have done, like internal web applications and things, like it's a group of people who've never developed something like this or managed a team that has developed something like this. So in some ways, there's a lot of room for growth, right? Like I am my own project manager. I get to learn about project management. I am my own, requirements gap product manager. I get to actually directly work with stakeholders. But in that process too, like it's not the same thing as going into a large company where everyone has their specialized role and everything is going to get done and all of that. And so kind of depending on what type of environment you're looking for, it can be pretty chaotic at times. And then again, depending on the team, my team pays the same as the lower end of average for software engineering. Many teams drastically underpay because everybody wants to work in baseball. And so they can get away with way underpaying people what they're worth. Because if you don't accept it, there's 200 other people barging down the door to take the position. And so a lot of what we see, at least in my department, I wouldn't say we pay unfairly, but a lot of people after 3 to 5 years experience in our department, they're very desirable engineers and they can get much better jobs elsewhere. And they tend to see 50 to 70% pay increases when they leave, which I think is higher than you would see even like for people who maybe aren't progressing as quickly as they would like. And many times it's only one role, like level increase. And a lot of that pay increase just comes from the difference. So sports data is really fun. I am absolutely still in many cases the only woman in the room, and that desperately needs to change. I'm really fortunate to work on a team where I feel valued and safe with the individuals that I work closely with. But I've heard a lot of horror stories from my department about things that occurred like 3 to 5 years ago before we had the team that we have now. I've heard things from some of the women who were the first people on those teams. It's still not always easy or welcoming. I think generally the Phillies has done a really good job of that. And I also have confidence that if something were to occur kind of in the outer reaches outside of the people I work closely with, that I have people who would speak up for me. But I don't know what it's like at every other team. And it's definitely something that, if that's something that's concerning to you, baseball is trying to change, but I don't know that they've done enough as of yet to be different. So for example, at spring training, there are a lot of male Hispanic coaches, but the center of the room for coaching is 100% male, and women are only on the edges of the room. So the women are the software engineers, the nutritionists, the dietitians. We do have women in leadership at the Phillies. And I think that that really needs to change. I don't think that I'm saying anything that's surprising to anyone here. And it's definitely not unique. I have some colleagues who work in football. It's even worse than football. But yeah, I think it needs to change. We need to make different decisions. We need people who are willing to take those positions and push for those changes. But you kind of need to know what you're getting yourself into in the process. So yeah, that's a little bit about me. Some reflections from my last year in the field. These are things I knew, but I don't think I had internalized beforehand. So the first one, you're going to learn on the job. Some of us, myself included, get a job and have only worked in vanilla JavaScript and worked through one React tutorial, and the entire role you're taking on is in React. And TypeScript, which you've never seen before. And you have to learn that as you go. And I think good companies look for people who have the capacity to learn more so than they look for someone who's already an expert in the things that they're doing. Not saying everyone, but I think that's what a lot of the better companies are doing. And I think for you as an individual, what I've learned is it's more important to demonstrate my ability to learn and to learn how to learn than it is for me to master all the things, because you are never going to know everything as a software engineer. And even if you stay in the same role, you're always going to need to be learning. And so those skills are more important than being the master of everything possible. With that, you're going to fail. you're going to accidentally delete something that brings down the entire API and have to have one of your coworkers help you bring it back up. It's going to happen. And so like you need to look for a role where failure is normalized and also where there is a system in place to help you fail successfully, right? To fail in situations that are lower stakes, to fail with mentorship and feedback so that you can learn from that. But you're gonna have, like, it's going to happen, and that's okay. And if, you know, nobody reviews your code and you're just allowed to push new code to production, like that's partially also on the company, that things shouldn't be set up that way, that you're doing that in the first week. So finding the right environment to fail in, but also like understanding it's going to happen and you're going to get confused and you're going to get frustrated. And it's not a reflection on your inability as a software engineer. And then you're not going to be a code bot. 99% of engineering roles, like you are a person who works on a team with people, and your ability to work with people and communicate with people is just as, if not more important than your technical proficiency. You need to know the tech, or you need to be able to learn the tech, but you also need to know how to work with people. And a lot of us come from other backgrounds where we've already built those skills. And so if you already have those skills, like leverage them. And if you don't, like definitely take the time to learn them. So yeah, that's me. I know I talked for a really long time. I'm sorry about that. I'm going to stop sharing. And at this point, you're welcome to ask me any questions you have. Yes, my job is really cool. Even with the cons, my job is really cool.
Can you share a little bit more about the experience of learning to be okay with rejection and move through that?
Yeah. So I had a really great therapist who first helped me realize that I was internalizing this idea that my success, like in my job or in my relationships, was what determined like my value as an individual. Like that's how I was thinking. And so like I had to learn to break this cycle of like my identity and my value does not come from the work that I produce or the way that work is perceived by other people. So like that was step number one. And as someone who has like multiple, both genetic and chronic like disorders, and deals with pain and chronic illness on a day-to-day basis, like it was very freeing to like come to that realization, and then have someone help keep me accountability to like continue to think that way of like my performance at work is not what defines my value. So like that was part number one. And then I was very like clear, like to some people who were close to me, like keep me accountable in this process. And I'm not saying that it didn't sting when I was turned down from jobs or that I wasn't disappointed. But a lot of it was just that really big shift in mindset. I still really care about doing well in my job. I still am really passionate about what I do, but I'm like continually reminding myself, like, that is not what defines me as an individual. And it's not what is like inherent to my value. Like we are all inherently valuable because we are alive and human beings. And that has nothing to do with our contributions in any way. So I think that that was like the biggest difference for me. And then it was just like, I also did quite a bit of reading on how common it is to be rejected from roles. It's even interesting, like everyone at the Phillies is absolutely wonderful. And like all of us, like got rejected from a lot of other roles in a lot of other places. And that's not a reflection of you. So it was just a continual reminder of myself of that. Yeah, I know that that's kind of like a little more vague, but for me, it really was a mindset difference. Front end or back end? Oh, that's tough. If I had to choose only one, I would choose front end. I really like being full stack. I really like being able to spend some time. Our stack is Python on the back end, and then React on the front end. Like I really like being able to build out my API routes and then design my UX and my UI and like display that to someone. But I think the biggest like dopamine hit for me is like being able to show someone like something not physical, but tangible. Oftentimes on the back end, you're like, well, there are now 30,000 rows of data that you can use. It's great. Like it just, to me, that's just not as exciting as like, here's a new web page that you can interact with. But yeah, I really like being able to do both. Questions that I asked. Okay, so I sought out, when possible, being able to actually talk to people who did the role that I was going to do. I asked about workload. So what does your workload look like? What does a typical day look like? I asked, like, what are you doing to embrace diversity across all areas? I asked, like, what are some of the biggest challenges? I asked, like, how do you deal with things when things go wrong or things fail or break? Like, what is your process or approach? Questions I might think to ask now that I didn't ask before is how do you mentor and help newer programmers grow? How do you provide feedback both to code and to individuals? Do you have, like, what does your setup look like? I know that that's kind of a vague question, but for example, if you're working in an environment where they don't have like a development setup, like you're going to write code, if you're going to write code and push it to main, that's terrifying. And I would never want to work in an environment like that ever. What does your development cycle look like? You know, how fast is it? How much time do you have for things like documentation? How much documentation do you have? Yeah. Those are some of the questions I had asked or would ask. I do wear a lot of hats. How do I stay organized? Couple of things. I still use paper, even though I'm a tech person. I have a calendar that has space on each day for writing notes, and like for the week also has like its space for like overall things. And so at the beginning of every week, I sit down and I organize myself as an individual. Like, what is it that I need to get done this week? Like, what is everything I could possibly get done this week? And then what are my have tos? And then every day I sit down at the beginning of the day and I'm like, okay, what am I working on today? And then, you know, I have that master list that as things come in, I add that to that list, and then I'm constantly reprioritizing and reorganizing. We do use Trello, but we're not that great at it. So like I do at least have cards for like the overall tasks that I'm working on, but to me, it generally isn't enough organization for me as an individual. I use paper. I think also like tools like, you know, digital to-do lists or craft or things like that are also, they can be really useful or helpful too. I find that if I physically write something down, I'm more likely to remember it. So for me, it's both organization and then also it helps my memory. But I have a whiteboard, and when I'm like blocking out like a new feature that requires like a complex state management or is like a complex process of refactoring or something, like I also still like go back to a whiteboard and like draft my like overall logic and process before I go into actually writing code. So I'm just still, I don't know if it's because of my age or what, but I can't fully get away from paper, as terrible as it is for the environment.
Any final questions before we wrap up? All right. Thanks so much, Rebecca, for joining us today. I really enjoyed this presentation, and I appreciate you being involved with Code the Dream.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. So for everybody, we've got